curious for Joe and maybe Sapir with your IMDb, what is the sort of the dashboard? If people are sort of going into this business, they're going to, let's say, a content or a consumer type of business, what are the key, you're telling people, here's the 3 to 5 metrics that you should have, that you should be tracking and living and dying by. What were those, what are you actually looking at on a day-to-day basis to run your business?
What it's interesting is I think this area is still in terms of the tools available. Optify is a good example of another Madrona company that is adding value here for entrepreneurs and businesses to track and measure. Google Analytics is available to anybody with a website, but they fall down today in terms of like the ultimate measures you actually want. I mean, yes, you can measure visitors, yes, uniques, that type of thing, but the conversion rates and the value that's being driven through your business is still not available in those tools, and it takes work and customization and other tools that are still being developed, maybe like Optify, to get to those numbers. But so, one of them is obviously you got to be measuring traffic, you got to be measuring how many unique people are coming through, you got to be measuring how many people repeat. Most businesses rely, and products in particular, the repeat user is a very important sign that your product is going to be sustainable and have value there. And then there's kind of now what value is that driving in your business? What's the conversion rate? What was the source of those individuals, and which sources convert at a higher dollar rate? Those measurements can get painful, but they're critical. And in fact, even if you're kind of trying to weigh development schedules and get something out there, I won't launch anything unless I know I can make that measurement all the way to the sale and have all my conversion metrics based on the website traffic, where they went, and how each of those sources converted, or we're not done with the project. Because the day you launch, you just need to be able to start monitoring that maniacally and then make adjustments.
I do think this idea of the best companies at monetizing also tend to be the best companies at measuring and having sort of really clear sense of what the metrics that really matter. I'm curious for IMDb or some other things, what were the key 2 or 3 or 4, whatever the metrics that you looked at to run that business?
Joe's already covered customer acquisition, funnel metrics that you should do, incoming traffic, conversion. One of the other things that I'd like to share, which was a huge insight for us, if you're thinking of launching a premium stuff, is whenever you try to migrate from free to premium, you basically go through an inertia effect from customers. And the question you have to ask is, at what stage do you want to fully capture the value? And one of the things we found out was free trial is a very effective mechanism to essentially, you're taking a risk on them. They may derive value over 1 week, 2 week, whatever you decide. But what we found was you need to find and then do your experiments. Maybe free trial may not be effective for your service, but for us, for IMDb Pro, it was very effective. It just basically made a wider known, and what we required from them was they had to tell us where they were coming from and also give us a credit card, so on the 15th day we can start charging them. So one of our metrics was how many people are taking free trial and which domains are they coming from. So if I start saying, hey, a lot of them have fox.com, it's like, okay, people in Fox are hot. So not only basically it widened the funnel, but it gave us more clarity on who's coming on that page, because otherwise, if someone comes in and decides not to register, you don't capture any information about them, so you can't act on it. All you can say is 99% didn't convert. So free trial is a very important mechanism. The other set of metrics which are extremely important is customer usage. Right? So along with customer acquisition, customer usage gets extremely important. So for us, if someone signs up for a paying subscription and they're not consuming any page use, they will churn because they signed up, but they didn't end up basically deriving any value outside that particular moment. Or other extreme, where you start seeing basically a single account consuming like 10,000 page views every month. You kind of know basically it's getting abused. So in both those cases, those are opportunities for you. So for example, we came up with all kinds of notification to send to people so that they get reminded that they signed up for the service and they can get interesting value. And over time, the notification basically became vertically sensitive. So the notification will send to cinematographer was very different than a director. But you're trying to send them off something useful value if they're not consuming it on their own. And if they're consuming too much of it, you try to basically figure out a way to kind of sign a group buy deal. But yeah, both customer acquisition, customer usage, and then manifestation of that happens in churn. And then in churn, one of the things we did, which really worked out well, is when people churn, we ask them to tell us alternatives, why they're leaving. So is it basically, is it the pricing issue? Is it the price value issue? But you break down the problem because they clearly were motivated to sign, or was it a one-time issue? But you just need to have a mechanism to keep learning and keep iterating. And if you do that, all the metrics will point in the right direction.
Sapir bring up a really interesting point about usage. I was talking to one of the very early guys at Salesforce, and one of the things that he told me was they know, depending on how someone is using the product, they're using certain features of Salesforce.com, they can predict almost with 100% accuracy whether or not they'll renew. And if they're not using certain features, they can predict almost with 100% accuracy whether they'll renew. So what happens is when they're calling up folks and they see, because it's of course it's a web service, they're not using certain stuff, as opposed to calling up and saying, hey, your subscription's going up. They call up and say, hey, you should really be using this particular feature set. And they try to force people into using the actual part of the product that they know leads to renewal. So it's interesting, just as you think about your products, instead of just being so focused on sort of churn, if you sort of focus on, okay, what is it that people that aren't churning are doing, trying to get, anyway, I thought that was a fascinating thing. Janice, you had a question.
So I have a question, I think for maybe all of you in a way. How much testing and segmentation are you doing as part of that process? Because you can figure out what populations you have and how valuable they are, but there's lots of different things you can do to up the value of that customer or find where the sweet spot of value is. So I'm curious how sophisticated you are in testing. Anybody?
I'll tell you that in the starting point, you don't have the luxury to basically build analytical tools and stuff. So it goes with hypothesis. And then you basically watch behavior and prove or disprove. I think the interesting segment, so like for example, like on IMDb Pro, it's a vertical sensitive stuff. So it's like you just go in with film professionals and then you go deeper, and you may basically do, it's mostly anecdotal based because you don't have the luxury, you don't have a big staff, you have a few people. So you have to kind of just use your logic and some informed data calling and try to see basically you can get some traction. And then the segmentation and stuff starts happening once the volume starts building, because then you kind of start segmenting some services. So at least in an early startup, you just need to be very scrappy. And it's okay if you don't have a data. You basically have hunches or you can read it. So for example, I needed to find out is IMDb Pro, if I'm getting 1%, 2% conversion on IMDb, is it a good thing or a bad thing? I can look externally and find some analog and then basically reach out to people. So even if I don't have that information, you can keep chugging it along. So to me, I think in the early stage, you just have to be just scrappy as hell. And then over time, you can basically bring in sophistication. But now, I look at Google Analytics, for example. That tool wasn't available basically when I started doing IMDb. So some of that stuff was very hard to do. But with time, there are more and more tools which are available as a software as a service that you can use. And even if you're not tech savvy, you can apply that. So take advantage of those free tools, but I won't obsess about, hey, unless I have this deep integration, unless I have that data, I can't move the business.
I would add one other thing that is just be prepared to make some ugly mistakes. Because I absolutely agree that early on it's going to be a lot of intuitive and so forth and hypothesis, but we had a few things early on. Our business is, the top of the lead funnel or the top of the funnel is all about lead volume. And our lead volume was all about our homepage design. And we went and made a couple of changes on the homepage, and suddenly we halved our lead volume. and we were in great pain for a couple of days while we were seeing, is that really what just happened? And then undid that quickly. But you definitely can stub your toe in a pretty serious way. But that's, it's about recovering quickly.
So can you actually stand so people can hear you? That's cool. All right.
So my question is for Joe and you. So how did you think about the number of users coming to your site, consumers, who would give up information, which would create the volume of data, so you had anything to sell?
Yeah.
Knowing that if you make them pay to, if you make consumers pay, then the number who come to the site is less than it would otherwise be, right? So how did you think that through?
Yeah. There's a complicated way to look at that, and there's a simple way. The simple way is, it's going to be a long time until we have a critical mass of data. So if I think of the U.S. workforce, 160 million people employed at any given moment, maybe more, or well, maybe less right now. And to be able to model kind of in-depth compensation data for businesses requires a lot of data. So at the startup phase, it was pretty clear that when we're making 35% improvements to the amount of data we're collecting, given our activities, that's a huge win for us. So it didn't take a lot of analysis to realize that the ultimate business was selling to HR departments, and we had a back-end revenue model. And what that did is it freed us up, when we made that realization, it freed us up to focus on the consumer experience, focus on being the best compensation brand out there, and generating as much data as possible. The complicated way to do that still gets talked about once in a while now that we're larger, right? You can get into more of that kind of analytics, but now we look at where do we need more data? Where don't we need as much data? We have a ton of school teacher data, a ton of nursing data, that type of thing, right? So we just don't, on an incremental basis, that extra profile, it doesn't give us enough value, right? So we can start tweaking the experience for certain classes of users once we identify them. And because they take a survey, we start to learn very early on which path they're taking. And then we can tune our experience to maximize the amount of data we get from categories of users that we want. And I think that's actually a pretty key